to look and see how you say good morning in Irish, but Guten Morgen. Welcome to the third in a series of 5 library lectures by the Smith County Master Gardener Association. My name is Dale Wade, and I am co-leader of the Education Program Committee with Becky Wade. In the green. Today's lecture is the Physic, Gardens That Heal, Gardens That Harm, and is presented by Elizabeth Waldron. Yeah. Elizabeth became a certified master gardener, graduating with class 24 in 2018. Certified master gardener, I might add. She has held several positions with Smith County Master Gardeners Association and currently serves as president. I give to you someone who takes pride in having dirt under her fingernails and calloused palms, President Elizabeth Waldron.
I definitely have paws, and they're definitely calloused, so that is all very true. So I really want to thank you guys for being here today. For those of y'all who don't know me, I am one of those people who likes a weird topic. So that's where I come from. I was a history major when I was in college, and my emphasis in history was ancient to Renaissance. I don't know anything about the modern world whatsoever, but I can tell you a whole bunch about what happened in ancient Egypt. And so this is the intersection of my love of history and my love of gardening. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Today I want to take you guys pretty much around the world through a bunch of different gardens, and also do a small commercial kind of in the middle. So buckle up, because this is going to be interesting. But I want to really introduce a modern audience to some really old ideas that may help inform you about why we think and say some of the things that we think and say about medicine today. So what is a Physic garden? A Physic garden is a botanical garden dedicated to the cultivation and display of medicinal plants. All modern botanical gardens, including the one that we take care of at the Rose Garden, the Tyler Botanical Garden, are actually derived from our cultural experience as Westerners of Physic gardens. This is an idea of what a household or a village Physic would have looked like in the Middle Ages. Since before humans had texts and treatises to learn about medicine, nature has provided us plenty of resources to heal our complaints. By foraging in woodlands, meadows, and water's edges, and little gardens like this, we have been provided medicine since ancient times, until only about 150 years ago. Most of our grandparents would have derived at least part of their medicine from nature. We are really one of the first generations that is kind of divorced from nature for our health. This is an example of a monastery Physic. It is at a Benedictine monastery in England. And the beauty and order of this formal garden is a contrast to the kind of casual garden that most normal people would have had. Its formality actually reflects the religious view that God has ordered the world in such a way that it is made to the benefit of men. These kinds of gardens also serve as a physical catalog to sort plants by their medicinal uses. This is a plan and a picture of the Chelsea Physic Garden in London. It is one of the very first and best known Physic gardens that was created outside of a religious setting. Its grand design and prominent placement in the middle of London illustrates the Renaissance focus on formal training and educating of tradesmen and professions, and sort of the moment in history when medicine got elevated from just a folk practice to an actual science. It was created in 1673 by the Worshipful Society of Apothecaries. I think that is the coolest name ever. And it was to supply their shops with actual medicines and to train their apprentices on which medicines did what. It is 4 acres, which is huge. Even for the time, that was a lot of space to take up in London. It contains Britain's oldest and largest fruiting olive tree and the most northern grown grapefruit in the world, which they grow up against a big brick wall to keep it warm. So to understand medicine, you kind of need to understand how people thought. And so I picked out 3 people that I thought represent the movement of ancient medical ideas into steps up into the modern world. So the first one is, of course, Hippocrates. He was a Greek that was born about 430 BC. And he looked around at the world and said, you know, people who live in this area tend to be healthier than people who live in this area. People who eat this way tend to be healthier than people who eat this way. People who expose themselves to these conditions in the work that they do tend to have different illnesses than people who do this other kind of work. And it got him thinking that the way that the Greeks were practicing medicine didn't really actually make much sense. There were 2 schools of medicine in Greece. One of them was the prognosis school of medicine that said, if we think you might survive this thing that's wrong with you, we will actually try to doctor on you. But if we don't think you're going to survive it, you've been cursed by God, and we don't want to make God mad, so we're not going to help you. Then there was the diagnosis theory of medicine that said, if we can figure out what is wrong with you, then we'll try to help you. But if we can't figure it out, if it's not obvious to us what it is, we're not going to treat you because God has obviously cursed you with a mystery. And we don't want to make him mad, or her, or any of the number of gods that were constantly afflicting people. So Hippocrates said, this is all foolish and everyone deserves a chance to be healed by whatever is wrong with them if we can possibly do it. So he started trying to practice medicine, and he realized that the body is a big pump. The heart actually moves blood through your body. Nobody knew that before. He also kind of understood that your digestive system and your urinary tract system and all of those things were taking fluids in, kind of pressurizing them and pushing them back out of your body. So he thought that the body was like this machine, sort of. And that it was like a clock that had to be perfectly balanced. And if you threw it off balance by something you did, by an accident, by an illness, that is what actually was making you sick. So the secret to health was to stay in balance. He also thought that cures should be kinder than the kinds of cures that the physicians of the time were doing. And he invented certain beds and chairs that actually helped people by putting them in traction. So it held them still while they were healing. And he encouraged people to rest when they healed, which was something no one had ever thought of before. So the next guy is Galen. And Galen was also Greek, but he was a Roman citizen and he lived in Rome. And he was super interested in medicine, and he had studied in a Hippocratic school and understood all of Hippocrates' ideas. But he was really interested in the way the body is on the inside. And the Greeks never did any kind of anatomy. They thought it was anathema to cut open a body, even a dead body. So you just didn't do it. It was a desecration. And so Hippocrates had some weird ideas about where things were in your body, because he'd never actually been inside anybody's body. But Galen wanted to know. He was super curious. And so because the Romans had a similar idea about doing anatomy and dissection as the Greeks, they really didn't think it was a good thing to do. So what does he do? A man who wants to do surgery and he wants to see inside a body, he becomes a surgeon for gladiators. They're constantly having somebody open up their body. So he started working on gladiators, and he became an expert not only in surgery, but in wound healing, and was actually really good. And because he also got to deal with the bodies of dead gladiators and could, secretly look at what was going on, he actually rewrote a lot of Hippocrates' treatises such that they actually represented real anatomical knowledge. After Hippocrates died, no one would change what he had said. He was so revered that it was like the Bible, and no one would alter any of the texts. But Galen wasn't scared, so he did it. And then the last person I want to talk about is somebody that here in the West we call Avicenna. His real name was Ibn Sina. But he was a Persian polymath who lived in the southern part of Turkey. And he was so smart that when he was 4 years old, his father sent him to live with the wisest man he knew. And a few years after that, that wise man sent him to another wise man. And then a few years after that, that wise man sent him to another wise man. And by the time he was 13, he was considered the smartest person in the world. He had studied with the best philosophers and the best scientists of his time. And by the time he was 20, he was writing books and treatises on all the known sciences. But one of his biggest loves was trying to take care of people in health. And he was really the first person that we could consider a psychologist. And he told doctors, you really need to look at how people believe about themselves and their health in order to help their healing. And he was the first person, because of his philosophy about mental health, people following him actually set up the first humane asylums and didn't just turn people who had lost their minds out into the streets. That they actually brought them into places where they were safe, where they were comforted, where they were well fed, where people would talk to them about what they were thinking. And he started the first practice of what we would consider to be modern psychology and understood how important psychology is to overall health. So, Al-Juzakani, who was a medieval physician, said, medicine did not exist until Hippocrates invented it. When he died, Galen revived it, and Ibn Sina made it whole and pale. So these are those physicians with their dates and important things, if anyone cares about that. So one of the problems with medicine in the West was that after the fall of Rome, Europeans actually lost their connection to any ancient healing. So the only thing that we knew was the few things that we had in a few libraries. And Charlemagne, who was very interested in having a healthy population in case he needed to go to war with a neighboring community, actually gathered up as many of those old treatises as he could find and secreted them to France. And then from there, a lot of those texts ended up going to monasteries in Ireland because it was so remote at the time and it was considered to be a really safe place. And so the Irish became known for being some of the best healers in the world. And he also was so impressed by the Benedictines' vows to do medicine that he declared that every Benedictine monastery had a garden to heal people and would take in the sick. So every Benedictine monastery became a miniature hospital. And, but other than him thinking about health, nobody else was really doing it. And he had taken all of these disparate bits of knowledge that were kind of spread around Europe at the time and kind of collected them in one location. So really and truly, it really set Europe back, even though he and certain elites that he knew were privileged to have access to that information. A lot of people lost it completely. But Middle Eastern doctors, having contact with the Byzantine Empire and having contact with both the Chinese and Indian subcontinent, can continue to expand ancient medical knowledge. And this expansion of knowledge and practice from Greek and Roman models to the wider worldview of the Muslims was re-examined at this time by European medical practitioners. And they were exposed to some of these innovative health things that people who had studied Ibn Sina's methods were using. And they decided that they were going to try to upgrade European medicine to be as good as what they saw from the Middle East and from the Far East. But that being said, they had some really bad ideas. The first bad idea is the doctrine of signatures. So the doctrine of signatures harkens back to that whole idea of why Benedictine Physic gardens are set up like they are. It is a belief that the universe has been ordered and organized by God in such a manner that every single thing a man encounters can present itself in such a way with such clues that men can identify it by its signs, its omens, and portents. And they can know the character of medicines and poisons and even of people and animals just by their physical appearance. This is a mandrake root, which was considered a tonic because it looked like a person. It's also why we think carrots are good for your eyes. When you slice a carrot, it looks like the iris of your eye. Lungwort is a little plant that's leaf is shaped like a lung, and they're kind of grayish and they have splotches on them, so they look like a diseased lung. So if you've got a cough, you should probably take it. St. John's wort is a little plant that's considered a tonic because when you pull it up out of the ground, its roots, when you crush them, emit this kind of red fluid that looks a little bit like blood, and so it must be good for your blood. Celandine is a little kind of herby weed that when you pull it out of the ground, it looks like it's been affected by nematodes. It's got little bulbs and things all over the roots. Well, that looks like piles to people, so they used it to make an ointment to treat hemorrhoids. And weirdly enough, all of these things really do those things that they thought. Carrots really are good for your eyes. St. John's wort really is a good tonic, but the issue is that all the things that didn't work and all the things that actually killed you when they looked like they would work, we kind of forgot about those because people were like, oh, don't do that. But the other things that, so it's not that they were right about the doctrine of signatures, it's that these things fit into that idea and we remember them to this day. So have you ever wondered why people are described as good-humored? It is not because they are funny. It is because it is thought that their humors in their body are balanced and they have good health. Melancholy people. Melancholy actually means black collar. And so melon is black and choly is collar. And that's where we get our word for chlorophyll. Choly in Greek means a liquid that has a yellowish or greenish color. So it's like some of the stuff in your body. Lily-livered. Bilious, my husband's favorite thing to say, because his grandmother used to say it. He calls things bilious all the time. Sanguine, people who are cold-natured, or have a dry humor, or who are hot-tempered, or people who are yellow or yellow-bellied. All of those things actually have to do with the humors. That's an illustration of the humors there. And this is a better one. So the four humors are phlegm, blood, yellow bile, which is called choler, and black bile, which is called melancholy. And if you're a person who understands the doctrine of signatures, you will understand that those different people represent different personalities. This person is sanguine. He looks, relatively healthy and in good shape. This person is phlegmatic. This person is choleric, and this person is melancholy. So the way it's divided is there's a wet side on this side and there's a dry side to your humors. The top part is cold natures and the bottom part is hot natures. So, and the left side is feminine and the right side is masculine because, it's the Renaissance. So sanguine people tended to have the very best health, and the next best health was phlegmatic people. And then the people down here did not tend to have very good health at all. So these are the phlegmatic diseases. They tend to be things that have to do with the lungs or with kind of a mucousy issue. So examples are tuberculosis, asthma, colds and flu, miasma, or you can be listless and indecisive. Or you can have swelling somewhere on your body. Those things are all considered phlegmatic diseases. Phlegmatic people were considered to be soft. They were pretty. They were pale. They tended to be passive and wishy-washy and indecisive and cowardly. The reason is that they were lily-livered. Their livers did not have enough blood in them. They were pale. And so as a result, they couldn't be brave. It wasn't in their nature to be brave. The way you treat these people is by doing the opposite of what their nature is. So you want to put them in dry air, you want to put them in hot environments, you want to do something called cupping, which is horrible, and I'll talk about it in a second. They need to eat bitter, salty, hot, and spicy foods, and they need to do strenuous exercise and travel. I'm sure strenuous exercise for someone who has asthma was not a very good thing to do, but hey. The picture is King Louis IX treating a person who has scrofula. Scrofula is a swelling of the glands in your neck, and it's often caused by tuberculosis. It can be caused by infection of various kinds, but tuberculosis is most often the kind. And the fact that the king had to get up in your face and touch your glands really makes me think that they didn't care much about the king. But, you know. It was supposed to be healing, and a lot of people thought they'd been healed from scrofula by being touched by the king, which is where you get the idea of the king's hand or the king's touch as being something that was beneficial to you. Now, cupping is one of the ways to treat phlegmatic diseases. Women tended, they thought, to have more phlegmatic diseases than men, probably because women got locked into homes and had to deal with sick people a lot. So, you know, there you go. But one of the things that they would do is they would take these little glass or metal cups and they would heat them on irons or flat pieces of metal until they were so hot you couldn't touch them. And then they would take them and put them on your skin. So they caused a horrible burn that would immediately swell up and be full of pus. And then they would lance it and let that pus out, and that was going to balance your phlegm. Because you were only supposed to have 1/4 the amount of phlegm in your body as you had 3/4 of blood. And so if your phlegm got out of balance, something was wrong and they had to get it out, and that's how they did it. So this is sanguine diseases. And kings tended to be more sanguineous than other people. And sanguine diseases have to do with things that make things red. So rosacea, psoriasis, and other reddening skin ailments, ulcers and internal bleeds, and gout was something that sanguine people were prone to. Sanguine people also tended to be really jolly, and they tended to be very brave. You wanted your knights to be sanguine. They also could be overindulgent, they could be lacking in prudence, and they tended to gluttony. So the treatment for this was bleeding. However, they could use it. I mean, any physician worth their salt would just use bleeding as the first thing that they did anyway, no matter what was wrong with you. They also wanted you to be in warm, wet weather. They wanted you to eat sour, tart, and wet, thin foods like soups and gruels. They thought that was good for a person who was suffering from the sanguine illness. And the bleeding that they did in 2 different ways. The king is covered with leeches. And the leeches would suck a certain amount and then fall off like a tick. Or they would use something called a flame, which is rather horrid. And it is a very, very tiny razor that has a really short blade. So it cuts you like a cat scratch. And they would cut you all up and down your arms and your legs until they got enough blood that they thought you would get rebalanced. So choleric diseases and cures are jaundice, scurvy, other liver ailments, and problems with the skin, eyes, and the hair. Because choleric people are thought to be hot and dry, then they tended to have dry skin problems and dry hair problems, and their eyes tended to be more sensitive because, you know, your eyes are not supposed to be hot and dry. So they also were prone to excessive anger or passion. They could be very critical, they were often oversexed, and they tended to have a lot of issues with jealousy, which is just, I don't know, it's a personality thing. So if you treat them, you wanted to put them in cold, wet weather, you wanted them to take cool baths, you wanted them to use diuretics, you wanted them to eat watery and oily foods that had a mild flavor. You never want to give a choleric spicy foods. Just remember that. Another thing that they did with cholerics is because they had, a lot of times they had skin diseases, even leprosy is considered a choleric disease. They used a lot of maggots and vomiting on these people. So maggots will only eat dead flesh. So if you have a gangrenous wound or a skin problem, actually maggots will help clean that wound up. So sometimes they were helpful. But, you know, making someone vomit a lot is probably not particularly helpful. Very good. So the last one of the humors is the melancholy humor. And it is depression and mania. It's lethargy. A lot of digestive complaints come from melancholy and temperaments. And people that were really thin were considered melancholic. What you needed was sunshine and hot baths. You needed to eat hot, spicy foods. You needed to eat foods that were really sweet. They probably were worried about the thinness, so they were trying to build people up. You had to use a lot of purgatives that would get rid of any extra bile in your system, because you could only have 1/64 of your body could be bile. So it needed to be real small amount. And then they suggested exercise. Often a pilgrimage was suggested. This might have actually worked on a lot of depressives. People know that a lot of times depressed people do better if they get taken out of the environment that has caused the depression in the first place. And going on a religious pilgrimage, being inspired, was probably very helpful to depressive personalities. So sometimes, I'm trying to say, yeah, these are bad ideas, but sometimes they actually worked. That's why they continue to be ideas for 2,500 years. So one of the things that people were learning as the Silk Road actually connected finally to Italy and ideas from the Far East were coming to the West was the idea of poisonous panacea, which seems crazy to us. I mean, why in the world would anyone take a poison? However, we do it now. So the original way that leprosy and syphilis was cured, and it could be cured even in the Middle Ages occasionally if you had the right kind of leprosy and your syphilis wasn't super far advanced. They would take leprous people that had dry leprosy. This does not work on wet leprosy. They didn't know it at the time, but that's the case. And they would put them in rooms and they would fumigate them with sulfur fumes, which are poisonous. But then they would take that burned sulfur that they fumigated them with and put it on their wounds. Well, that burned sulfur is how we get sulfa drugs to this day. So it does sometimes work. It can help people. Syphilis was cured with mercury. And if you did not give someone too much and actually shut their liver function down, it can actually cure syphilis. So this is the basis for modern homeopathy that millions of people to this day use, that a little bit of poison is good for the body, a little bit of poison builds up your immune system. And the extraordinary medical miracle of chemotherapy that saves people every day is loosely classified as in this way. And chemotherapy is actually, the original drug for chemotherapy is made from periwinkles, which are the same little star-shaped flower that we grow in our gardens in the summertime here. So food is medicine. This is the Indian, that last idea is actually a Taoist Chinese idea. The Indian subcontinent's contribution to medicine is Ayurveda, meaning basically that you are what you eat. And every doctor kind of knows that. Just instinctively, we know that people who eat better tend to have better health outcomes. But in India, they took that to a whole other level. So this is an Ayurvedic chart that's dividing up the body in all of these different classes. There's the Kapha, Pitta, and Vata. Kapha people are earthy, and they have diseases of an earthy nature. Pitta people are fiery, they have fiery diseases. Vata people are airy, and they have airy diseases. And so not only did having one of these body types or one of these illnesses determine a whole class of foods that you should eat and a whole class of foods you shouldn't eat, but it also determined what you should do for a living. It determined who you should marry. I mean, it was a system. What kind of exercises you should do. And there are different kinds of yoga for different kinds of personalities in Ayurveda. So now for the commercial part of this. This is Women's History Month. Y'all know that? So I am going to have a moment for the women out there. There was a big controversy about the role of women in medicine and medical education that really hasn't even been resolved to this day. It's getting better, but it's still a problem. So this is what women's role in medicine actually looked like in the Middle Ages. This is a woman who is brewing something, an herbal remedy for her husband because he's sick. And for most of history, women have been doing all the dirty work of caring for the sick. To this day, the word nurse means not only a woman who is caring for the sick, but also someone who feeds the sick. And we think of that as a feminine word, even though I'm sure every single one of us knows a male nurse. So, but it just feels feminine to us. But at this time in history, the only people who had things like flames or tongs that were strong enough to pull out people's teeth tended to be either smiths or barbers. And smiths were considered to be a little bit on the side of bad. Smiths were doing something kind of magic. They were making something out of raw ore. And so a lot of smiths were considered to come from a lineage of people who had magic in their systems, or who might have made a pact with some dark force. So you couldn't trust a smith to do your medicining for you, but you could go to the barber. And the barber had access to clean water, and he had scissors and knives and razors, so he could do all of the doctoring that you possibly needed. This is a little bit like advertisement as reality. So if I own a really good set of pots or a really expensive stove, then I'm automatically a good cook. Tools do not equal expertise. So this was a problem. And as a result, a lot of people realized that you could train a physician, you could actually teach them how the body works, and you shouldn't probably let the barbers do this anymore. But because barbers had such a terrible reputation, people had been turning to the old women in their village since the beginning of time. And those old women had knowledge that had been passed down literally from the time of Hippocrates to them, and they were the holders of ancient medical knowledge. Even in tiny, remote villages in the middle of nowhere, there was probably a wise woman in that village who had some medical knowledge, real medical knowledge, and had used it to help her community. Physicians needed to get rid of those women. So this is what male physicians in apothecary wanted you to think a woman's role was in medicine. This is a witch growing a potion for a patient, or not a patient, a client. Hildegard von Bingen is probably the most important woman of the Middle Ages that had anything to do with medicine. She was brilliant. She was so smart that when she was 13, her father brought in one of the smartest men in all of Europe to train her. And he was in his mid-20s, and she was 13 and 14. And she fell in love with him, and he with her. And as soon as her father and brothers found out about it, they did some really awful things to him, which he survived. But she decided that she would never love anyone else, so she joined a nunnery at the age of 15, and immediately became the abbess because she was smarter than everybody else. She wrote a book called the Physica, which is a way to train nuns in her Benedictine monastery how to heal people. And one of her favorite plants was the rose. And I think this is so beautiful because she says that if you have small ulcers on your body or you need to withdraw mucus, instead of using cupping, just lay rose petals on their skin. It'll draw out a small amount of the mucus. And actually rose is a little bit drying. That's why it's used as a tonic for people with oily complexions. If someone is wrathful, they should take a little rose and sage. The sage gives them more wisdom, helps them not be so silly and wrathful, and the rose calms their spirit. Rose is good to add to potions, unguents, and all medications. Even if a little rose is added, the potion is so much better because of the good virtues of the rose. I mean, this is a woman who is trying to train people to do a softer, gentler kind of medicine than what the world was being exposed to at the time. And she was right. This is the Voynich manuscript. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of it, but for about 100 years, it was one of the biggest mysteries in the world. The Jesuits put it up for sale in 1903 in Rome, and nobody could figure out what it was because it's like this super trippy book that has like flying people and people turning into plants and plants turning into dogs, and it's just so weird and nobody can understand what it was. And it has been weird like that since the Middle Ages. The very first person that we know who owned this book was Francis Bacon, who was an alchemist, an English alchemist. He then gave it, or it was inherited by John Dee, who was a soothsayer for Queen Elizabeth I. And then John Dee got kicked out of England for being a magician, and he went to the Holy Roman Emperor at the time, whose name was Rudolph II, lived with him for a while. He gave him the book, and then Rudolph II gave it to one of his favorite occultists and Kabbalists, whose name was Jacob Tepnes, and then somehow the Jesuits ended up with it. But nobody understood what it was. Nobody could read it. And then one day, a dude is walking through Oxford University, where they had it, and he looks down at it and he starts reading it, much to the astonishment of the guy who's sitting there looking at it. And it turns out it's written in a Proto-European language that was only spoken at the time by a single group of nuns living in Portugal that were known for their healing. And Queen Maria of Castile was trying desperately to get pregnant, but she was barren. And she went to them and gave them a huge amount of money such that they could rebuild their falling apart little nunnery. And they made this book for her to help her try to conceive a child, which she did not successfully do. However, she lived a very long, healthy life and changed the course of politics in Spain. So this is the basis of poison. I bet none of you can name a single male poisoner from history. I know a lot about history and I can only name one. But I bet everybody knows that, you probably don't know Nero's mother's name, but you probably know that she was known for poisoning people. That was Agrippina. Lucretia Borgia was known for poisoning people. Catherine de' Medici was known for poisoning everybody. So, the issue was, at this point in history, at the late Renaissance, when we start deciding that all women are poisoners, or can be, is about the same time that there's been a series of bad wars, a series of terrible plagues, and suddenly a lot of women, for the first time ever, ascend the thrones of Europe. And all over Europe, there are women that are running countries, and they're doing a good job. And men are terrified of this because it should be falling apart and going to hell in a handbasket. Lots of preachers and priests are preaching against the tyranny of women, rulers. So it's very convenient to say, well, look at these bad women. You know, that all women are like this, really, and secretly. And so that has shaped us as a culture, even though it was really just a political stunt. And Catherine de' Medici really did poison people. I'm not sure that Lucretia Borgia actually poisoned people. I think probably her dad did it. And that's the thing. Think about history. Who has the motive and the opportunity and the means to poison more people, men or women? Actually, women couldn't inherit anything. So how many old uncles got knocked off by their nephews so they could inherit? How many men decided that the love interest of the little heiress down the street needed to be knocked off so they could marry her? I mean, think about it. How did Nero get rid of people? He hired his mother's poisoner. So, that was really the formal effort to remove women from the medical practice. As physicians and healers and apothecaries started actually going to school, paying money to somebody to learn how to do medicine, they really needed to leave the school and be able to make some money. Well, if you're still going to the little root wife down the street and you're not using their products and letting them work on you, then you're never going to make your money back that you just spent. So you have to decide, you have to make everyone believe that women can't heal you and they're possibly going to poison you. And so that's where that comes from. We already decided that the barber up there who's pulling the teeth is probably not the right guy for the job. So the modern pharmacopoeia is a really amazing thing. The wonder of being able to buy a high-grade, reliable medicine is a purely modern phenomenon. Even only 100 years ago, the simplest medicine, something like an aspirin, you had to go to your pharmacist and have them compounded for you from their store of chemicals and things that they had on their shelves. And they either had to have a prescription from your doctor that was made specifically for you and your needs, or they had to have an old family recipe of how to do them. So before just 100 years ago, people crafted their own remedies at home, or they hired apothecaries of uncertain training and skill. I mean, literally, you could just hang a sign outside your door that said you were a doctor or a pharmacist just about 150 years ago, and people just believed you. So, and they were crafting these things from exotic ingredients, and sometimes poisonous. Of course, we do that now. So, up comes our hero, Nicholas Culpeper. And he was an English herbalist and physician. He was born about 1616. And he thought that bloodletting was a stupid and dangerous practice. In fact, he called doctors blood-sucking vampires, literally. He was really smart. His grandmother happened to be one of those little old ladies who lived in a village. He was called a root wife, who did healing, and she had trained him from the time he was a child on medicinal herbs. And he was also self-taught, so he taught himself Latin. He taught himself astrology and astronomy. Really, really smart guy. He ended up moving to London and apprenticing himself to one of the most famous apothecaries at the time who didn't know how to speak Latin. Nicholas Culpeper, who was a teenager, taught him to speak Latin so he could actually read Latin text. The apothecary could not read Latin. How every medical treatise was written at the time, he couldn't read it. So it goes to show you the kind of training apothecaries had, even then. So he got caught up in the English Civil War, and he was so valuable that the English wouldn't let him go to the front lines. They sent a bunch of surgeons to the front lines, but they wouldn't let Culpeper go to the front lines, so he actually survived it. And after the war, only half of the people who had been practicing medicine before the war were still alive. And there were only 110 licenses given to physicians in England at the time. There were only ever 60 practicing physicians at any given time. So there was less than 30 at the end of the war. And no one, they were elite, they were expensive, and they were rare. A regular person suffering from some kind of illness had absolutely no hope of seeing a doctor. So Nicholas Culpeper, seeing this problem, writes Culpeper's Herbal. It was the first English language herbal that was written specifically so regular people could diagnose an illness and find a cure in their fields and waysides and administer those cures in tested doses. Because he had been doing this his whole life and had gotten to work on a whole bunch of people and soldiers. And he knew. So now we're back to plants. These are poisonous plants. These are the ones that Locasta, who was Nero's poisoner, created for him for his political cure. If you needed to remove a political rival, she poisoned them. Juliana Toscana, who was a famous poisoner in the Italian Renaissance, created for women what was known as the Italian divorce. In the early Renaissance, there was a woman who was burned at the stake whose nickname was La Voisson, which means the neighbor lady. And she actually was famous for creating love potions for courtesans. And one of these courtesans happened to be the lover of the King of France, and she was accused of poisoning him. So, and was burned at the stake for it. So during the late 19th century, Victorian poisoners were all the rage. I mean, think about it. If you really want to poison somebody, you've probably got kind of an exciting life. I mean, there's something probably seedy, cool going on in your life. You know, you're trying to steal something, you're trying to run around on your husband, you're doing something. And I mean, why else would you need to poison somebody? So they have these exciting, scandalous lives. They're leaving tragedy in their wake. What better thing to fill the newspaper with than stories about these people? So, and a lot of these people were using Nicholas Culpeper's book to create their own garden poisons. Agatha Christie had the great advantage of growing up during this time and being exposed to all this salacious material. And as a result, many modern mystery novels are based on some of these plant-based poison ideas. Sadly, even by the time Agatha Christie was starting to write, we had finally figured out how to actually test for poisons. So very few people get poisoned anymore. It's such a shame. So this is the poison bouquet. In this picture are some of the biggies. Datura, which I grow in my garden now, was used in very minor doses to treat pains of the stomach, the teeth, and the fever, but it causes terrible hallucinations. Jimson weed is actually a kind of datura. So if that gives you any idea of what kind of hallucinations can be caused by datura. Castor beans is to this day, and my mother talks about it all the time, used as a laxative and a purgative. It can also be used on your skin to treat a fungal infection. The deadly poison called ricin is made from the dried mashed beans. And this has been in the news a lot lately because the people from the Soviet Union use it, in Russia use it to poison people. Belladonna means the beautiful woman. It was used as a cosmetic to rouge your cheeks and your lips. The berries are kind of purpley and they stain your skin red, so you can have nice cheeks and lips. But as that sap seeps into your skin, it's poisoning you, and it causes your eyes to dilate, which makes your eyes big and mysterious. So it was used a lot by courtesans and other women of questionable repute a lot, but they could also use it on men, mixing in their drinks to make them fall into a stupor so they can steal. Hellebore is used as a purgative, and I also grow this in my garden, and castor beans too. I don't grow belladonna. And it, as used as a purgative, can cause you to vomit yourself to death. It also slows your heart rate and suppresses breathing, like an opioid. There are people who will tell you that there's a difference between white hellebore, which is good, and black hellebore, which is bad. They're lying to you. It's all the same. It's called white hellebore in some places because the flowers are white. It's called black hellebore in other places because the roots, weirdly enough, unlike most plants, instead of being white or flesh color, are actually really dark gray. And but it's the same plant, and it's very poisonous. So the herbal healers, two of the most common that we know today are quinine, which is used to treat malaria. And does anybody know where it comes from? It's the bark of a tree. They use the bark and they steep it into a tea, or they powder it down and make a medicine out of it. White willow is the same thing. That is where we get aspirin from. Even to this day, it is the bark of a white willow tree. We use a lot of medicines from plants. Cannabis sativa makes a medicine called drobenol that increases the appetite for cancer and HIV/AIDS patients. Mayapple, which is highly poisonous, makes a drug that stops cancer progression. Calabar bean is made into a drug that treats myasthenia gravis, and so on and so One of my favorite is a little plant called Chondrodendron tomentosa. It is something that people in South America used to poison arrows. It's deadly poison. And it is now used as an anesthesia ingredient. So we're getting back to gardens. This is one of my favorite paintings in the whole wide world. It's of a Tubu lady who is in her still room with her daughter, and they've just come from the garden, which is there behind them, and they brought all of these flowers and things that they're going to distill down into perfumes and essences and spices for their garden and make medicines out of. And the reason a still room is called a still room is because it has a still in it. The very best way to preserve any of these things for any long period of time is actually to distill them and store them in alcohol. So, also, I want to someday wear a silk dress in my garden and stay clean with that. So, yeah, this is aspirational for me. So, healers and balms. This is a picture from a modern herb shop, and you know, many people are taking herbal supplements for minor ailments and concerns to this day. In Germany, one of the most advanced countries in the world, 90% of physicians in Germany prescribe herbal supplements to their patients to help them in their normal course of medical treatment. In a lot of the world, especially the second and third world, at least 70% of people primarily still rely on herbal medicines as their basic cures. So, and a lot of those things are still made exactly like they were today, or hundreds of years ago. Horehound cough drops. They're just like they always have been. Medicated powders, calamine lotion, all of those things are really the same recipes that great-grandmothers were using. So diet is remedy. Everybody knows that how you eat really does determine a lot about your health. So plant-based, low-processed, high-fiber diets are the lowest inflammatory diets that you can use. And colorful fruits and vegetables, along with flavorful herbs and spices, are not only more appealing to eat, but have a wider array of vitamins and minerals that can actually be utilized by your body. A whole bunch of the stuff you take as a supplement just goes right through you. So, hobby as a health plan. From Hippocrates to Culpeper in the dietitians of today, everybody says the best cure is prevention, and the best prevention is a healthy, varied diet plus consistent physical activity to maintain your vascular health and muscle mass. So, for those of you who don't garden, go garden, because it definitely keeps you in constant physical activity. There's never a day you don't have to be out there doing something. And you can grow your own food, so gardeners have it made. So these are, now we're back. We've gone around the world, and now we're back specifically to gardens. So this is a garden at the Novartis lab in Switzerland, and it is a Physic garden with a very modern Swiss style. Those little kind of bridges are actually see-through, and all of these plants, because it's so cold in Switzerland, all of these plants are buried below the grade of the ground, and you can walk over them and look down in them. And it's a really neat garden. This is actually a picture of it over here of what it is like if you're walking over the little bridges. But it helps keep the plants warm. And this is periwinkles that they've used to make chemotherapy at Novartis. This is a root wife's garden. It's in California, and it is actually planted to show people what an old witch's garden might look like. I know that women herbalists were blamed and often maligned, but really and truly, for thousands and thousands of years, women actually kept medical tradition alive. This is Anwood Gardens in Northumbria. It's actually a 14-acre garden, but a couple of acres of it are dedicated to the poison garden. I want to go here so bad. And look,
very cool.
some of the plants are in cages. They're in trouble. And they have the coolest signs. And there's a little witch house. I just love it. I love this garden. The modern physic garden really seeks to educate us about plants as well as medicine. But mostly, they seek to teach us that our lives have always been and will always be linked to plants. We cannot separate ourselves from them. They literally make the oxygen that we breathe. This is a physic garden in Nairobi, and it just goes to show that these are not a Western phenomenon. So if you want to create your own physic garden, this is what you should do. You should choose a style. Circular is, of course, the most traditional, but any kind of orderly arrangement will work. You need to prepare your beds and amend your soil for drainage and fertility. If you live in Texas, you probably don't have particularly fertile soil, so amend it. Also, if you're planting herbs, which most of the things that are going to go in a physic garden are going to be herb or herb-like, they do require really good fast drainage. Group your plants according to cure, or better yet, if you're actually a gardener, group them according to their water and light needs and actually put tags on them so you know what they are. This is my hand-drawn version of a physic garden because nobody does these anymore, so I did one for you guys. This is a physic garden in the four-humor plan. So we've got this corner over here that is for the phlegmatic people, and it heals coughs and colds. And the kind of thing you can grow in there are hyssop, borage, echinacea, catnip, poppies, carrots, peppers, and elderberries. For the sanguine people, you kind of need general tonics. Sanguine people have good health, but a little tonic never hurt. So ginger, turmeric, basil, sage, thyme, garlics and onions, St. John's wort, and a rose that has hips, because they have vitamin C. So for the choleric folks out there, you need your aloe veras, and your evening primrose, and your calendula, and your comfrey, tomatoes, cucumbers, sunflowers, witch hazel, almond, olive, and avocado. Again, oily, mild things. And for your bilious people, you probably have some problem with your digestion. So you might need some chamomile and some mint. Fennel's good for digestion. Mallow, senna, licorice, figs, lemons, pumpkins, winter gourds, cabbage, and greens can all go in that side of your room. Oh, and rosemary in the middle because rosemary is just good for everything. So for everybody who wants to study more about this, you can meet me in the corner and I'll tell you all kinds of ridiculous things that you never really wanted to know. Or you can visit the websites of the Chelsea and the Distant Visit Garden. Science Direct does a lot of things with humoral medicine. Discover Magazine does a lot of things of weird history stuff. And biography.com, you can look up famous doctors of history. Then everybody should take the gander one day at Culpeper's Complete Herbal. When he published it, he made sure that it was published at the cheapest publishers he could find, and they didn't bind it. It was one of the very first paperback books, so that it was cheap enough that people could afford it. Henrietta Leicester wrote a wonderful book called The Medieval Woman. Laurel Rockefeller wrote a book called The Renaissance Queens that really kind of makes you understand why women were so scared of them. They were really good at their job. Amy Stewart wrote a book called Wicked Plants, which is super fun. Sandra Lawrence wrote The Witch's Garden, and An Egyptian Herbal is also a really clever book by Lise Manouchian. So I want to thank you guys very much for listening to me Babylon for an hour. And I want to remind you, if you have garden questions, please go to Smith MG Help Desk on the World Wide Web, and you can email us questions or you can call our help desk. And remember that we have events coming up. So I have a note here that gives me these dates because I'm not going to remember it. Our home garden tour is May 20th. We're having a design workshop at Glass Recreation Center on July 14th. Bulbs to Blooms will be at Pollard Methodist Church on October 14th. We're also going to be at the Artisan Market at the Goodman House on April 14th and 15th, and then I'm doing something at the Troop Library on April 29th.